Welcome to another episode of the Gary Plock Tennis Show. Tonight I'm going to be examining a little bit of the life of a Eastern tennis player named Adam Rosen. Came up in the era with John McEnroe and so many of the great Eastern tennis stars, and hopefully he's going to give us a little input about what it was like back then. Adam, how are you tonight?
Great, Gary. Thank you for having me. And I love the show. The interviews with Steve Siegel, Steve Berliner, and a couple of the other ones you've done recently, I thought were outstanding.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And you know those guys. Tell us about how you grew up as a young man in New York City, or a young boy.
Well, I was born in New York City. Both my parents lived in, my father was from the Bronx, which is part of New York City. My mother was from Brooklyn. And after I was about 2 or 3 years old, they decided they didn't want to raise kids in New York City, so we moved to the suburbs. And I grew up in a town called Rosen Heights, which was right next to Port Washington, Long Island. And it was just right at the time in the 70s where tennis was having a boom, I think across the whole United States, but certainly in the eastern United States, because they had a lot of indoor courts, they had a lot of tennis clubs coming up. And I picked up the game at about 10 years old.
Where was your first experience of playing tennis? I'm sure it was not at Port Washington Tennis Academy, obviously, at that time.
No, I went to summer camp at a place called Robinson Crusoe Summer Camp up in Massachusetts. And there was a tennis pro there named Marty Grossman, whose son was actually, 2 sons are very good players. David Grossman played in college, and his other son played at Harvard. And he had nothing to do with the summer camp because this was an arts and crafts summer camp. My mother had decided that I was too into sports. So she decided to send me to an arts and crafts summer camp. So I learned how to, ride in a canoe and build a treehouse, that kind of stuff. But there was no one to play sports with. And I was playing baseball and basketball and was into all the sports. So the only sport that I could really play by myself was to go over to the tennis pro and see if he wanted to hit balls with me. And that's how I started.
How about that? So you actually started in Massachusetts and not New York. So when you came back to New York, obviously you had caught the bug and you wanted to play tennis. Did you tell your parents that, or
you just picked it? And in our community, we had a 7-court club with a lot of players. Joe Rosenberg was my age. He was a good player. His mother was a good player. And then we had Jason Schwartz, Sam Schwartz, who played college tennis, Alan Shukow, Steve Shukow. All these guys belonged to this little tennis club. So I sort of just hung around and kept playing, and I took some private lessons. And then about 2 or 3 years later, Joe Rosenberg's mother really knew about tennis. And Harry Hopman had just come to Port Washington Tennis Academy. I was maybe 14 or 15 years old. And Port Washington Tennis Academy was the next town over from where we lived. So she said, I'm enrolling Joe into this tennis academy for drills. It's really drills. It wasn't private lessons. And so I asked my parents, and they said, well, as long as we can carpool, you can go. So I got into a carpool and was thrown into Port Washington Tennis Academy, which I had no idea what I was getting into.
Port Washington Tennis Academy and Harry Hopman are synonymous with being one of the original tennis, tennis academies where people would congregate, and a lot of different tennis pros. Tell us about some of the tennis pros that were at Port Washington at the time.
Harry Hopman had a very long career in Australia. I later learned he was the Davis Cup coach, and he had coached Laver and Rosewall and Emerson and everything else. And he was also a player. And at the end of his career, I think he wanted to retire in the U.S. He came over. The guy who owned Port Washington Tennis Academy, his name was Hai Zhaozen. And he hired Hopman, and no one knew who the heck this guy was. This little Australian. And he brought a bunch of Australian pros, and he brought Tony Polifax, who was the Mexican Davis Cup Grand Slam champion. And he brought Roger Dowdeswell from Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. And kind of Bob Brent and Peter Marmaru and a bunch of world-class players with the pros. So, but
Wow.
of course, we had no idea as kids who these guys were, and none of them, there was no internet, so you couldn't look up somebody to find out, what their ATP ranking was. But those were the pros, and the kids were. I mean, it turns out we had McEnroe, Eric Fromm, Peter Renner, Bob Rosello. I mean,
Yeah, I'm looking at this 14 and under Eastern ranking book, and it starts with John McEnroe, Peter Rennert, Fritz Bunig down at 16, who became a great pro.
And Marcel Freeman, Andy Kohlberg.
Wow, that's a lot of great players. And
yeah, so it was like being thrown into the fire. And of course, at the time, no one knew that McEnroe was going to be McEnroe. He was just a little lefty. He was talented, but I don't know if anybody knew.
Yeah.
So I was put in the middle level group. I was not in the top level group. Top level group was the top guys, and I was in the middle level group. But the crazy thing about the middle level group was most of the guys in the middle level group ended up playing Division I tennis.
Wow. Well, powerhouse. And your parents did not play tennis, is that correct?
No, not at all. My father was a pretty good basketball player. He was about 6'2", and played, baseball and all the New York sports, ping pong. But no, they didn't. But once I got into it, we belonged to this little community club. And instead of going to summer camp after that one experience, I decided to hang around and play tennis during the summer and play tournaments. And that's how I got into the Eastern 1200s, 1400s. I played the whole little Eastern circuit.
Now, Adam, you're a rather tall man. How tall are you?
6'4".
You're 6'4", so I'm assuming you were also fairly tall as a child compared to the other children. Did you find that to be a asset or a deficit in tennis?
I didn't have great conditioning or footwork, so in singles, I would say it was a deficit. In doubles, it helped me. Just being tall generally, I had a pretty good serve.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Hoffman used to tease me and ask me why I wasn't playing basketball. And he's the one who sort of convinced me to get to net and work on my volleys, because he said you're not going to do much from the backcourt.
Yeah, well, what a luxury you had having Harry Hoffman, who most people know was longtime, as you said, longtime Australian Davis Cup coach and coached the best players in the world for many years, and he was obviously a really fitness fanatic. He really worked everyone.
He was not a technical coach. He would just run you around, make sure that you could get to every ball and get into the best shape possible.
Mm-hmm.
He was really a fitness fanatic before that was really in vogue. And he also sort of saw that McEnroe, didn't like to do the 2-on-1 drills that Hobbit made so famous. So he would have McEnroe go out and play sets against some of the top pros that I mentioned. Tony Halifax, who was still great,
mm-hmm.
and Elswell. So I think that kind of helped McEnroe in an indirect way, because McEnroe wasn't really into practicing the kind of practice that Hobbit wanted.
Yeah.
And McEnroe was getting match play against world-class players when he was 14, 15, 16.
I remember him talking about one of the reasons he played so much doubles is so he didn't have to practice on the tour with other people, and he could practice playing doubles. So,
yeah.
So you were ranked, but you weren't highly ranked enough to have the top schools looking at you, but the second layer obviously did. Where did you end up going to school?
My ranking was always outside the top 10, so I was not invited to Kalamazoo,
mm-hmm.
Louisville, St. Louis, all the real nationals.
Uh-huh.
I did play the Easter Bowl and a couple of others. I ended up going to UMass Amherst, University of Massachusetts, for a year, and then I transferred to the University of California, Santa Barbara, and basically was a moderately successful college player, is what I would say. Not to the level of your college career or Mike Grant or a lot of other people you've interviewed.
I see. So, but you had a good college career, it sounds like, and Santa Barbara wasn't a bad place to be, was it?
It was great, and I got to play some great teams. And,
Yeah, sure.
we had matches against Long Beach State, UCLA, so I got to see some of the very very good guys up close and personal.
Hmm. And then so you finished up your career in college, and then law beckoned. Did law school beckon right away, or?
Yeah, I had no interest in trying to play
Uh-huh.
after college. I was pretty convinced. I didn't have confidence. That was my problem. Growing up at Port Washington Tennis Academy, I always felt like I wasn't in the top group. And in college, California, certainly, I didn't feel like I was in the top group. And the guys who were going to go off and play satellite tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, these guys are all better than me. There's no real reason to try to do that. And my father probably wasn't going to finance it. He was a Depression era guy who grew up in New York and worked very hard. His view was tennis or any sports was a great thing to do as a recreational thing to keep yourself in shape. But the thing you had to do was go to school, get a career. So,
Well, let's talk about that, because your career became law, and your father was somewhat of a famous. I know that I read a part of a book called Outliers that not only mentioned him but told his story, and it's kind of interesting. Can you elaborate on your father and his career? Tell the viewers who he
I
was.
decided to go to law school, and just to give you an idea of what my father was like, he wasn't around a lot when I was growing up because he was working very hard at his firm he was building that ended up being a pretty well-known firm. The first thing he said when I went to law school is he said, "Don't go to law school because you think you're going to become a well-known, rich, or famous lawyer, because that's one in 100,000, one in a million. Go to law school because you think it's a good career, you're interested in the law, you want to serve clients." And so, he was very, very down to earth, and that is why I went to law school. And I wanted to become an environmental lawyer because my father was a corporate lawyer. And the book Outliers was a very interesting story because I don't know if anybody, people who are listening to this, all 6 people probably, sorry, if they've read the book, but it's very interesting because the whole idea of Outliers is that people who are highly successful often owe that success to timing and circumstance and luck, in addition to hard work and intelligence, those things, but a lot of it has to do with timing. And so this guy Malcolm Gladwell is the author, and he interviewed my father because my father had built a firm in New York called Plock, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz. And people who are lawyers in the United States probably know the firm, and people who are in finance and Wall Street in New York know the firm. And it became a very, very, very successful firm. But it wasn't successful when I was growing up. He was just building.
And so,
the other thing I'd add is, he graduated. He was born in 1930, which is the middle of the Depression in New York, to parents who were Russian immigrants who had immigrated from Russia in the 20s and who had no education, didn't know the language, and they worked in basically a women's dress factory. Sewing or pressing dresses. That's what they did. And so my father went to public high school, and he went to City College of New York, which was basically free, and lived at home. Never lived in the dorm. Went away for school, and then he went to law school at NYU in New York, and also lived at home. So he never left home until he graduated law school and went to the Army for 2 years. He lived at home his whole life. And at the time of graduating, this is part of the story that Malcolm Gladwell says. In 1952, when he graduated law school, I was born in 1958, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for graduates of NYU who were Jewish And NYU was a second tier school at the time, not a first tier school. Now it's a first tier school in both undergraduate and graduate. But before it wasn't. It was Columbia and some other schools, Ivy League school. And being Jewish didn't help because there were a lot of there was anti-Semitism in the legal profession at the time, and the best firms didn't hire Jewish lawyers. In general, there were some exceptions, but generally they didn't hire them and they didn't promote the department. However, there were Jewish firms. So my father went to a Jewish firm and he started to practice the areas that this Jewish firm was focusing on, and those were two areas that the more established firms didn't practice in. The two areas were mergers and acquisitions, which are basically corporate takeovers, when one corporation wants to take over another corporation. Sometimes it's hostile, and sometimes it's friendly. The other area was bankruptcy and reorganization. And that was another area that the big, more established firms didn't want to deal with either. So my father ended up in a firm called Newberger. I'm forgetting the name, but it doesn't matter. A small firm, and he basically worked with 2 or 3 guys from NYU. They all went to the same firm. They were all in the same situation. They all graduated at the top of their class at NYU and got rejected by every big firm, and went to the small firm, which was a very successful small firm. And they became partners there. And then eventually they decided to break out on their own in 1965 when I was in, grade school. And they started an own firm called Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz, and it became one of the most successful, profitable firms in the United States. It's still is.
What were some of the, were there any landmark cases or big clients that they represented? I'm sure they did.
Yeah, they were involved in all the big deals. AT&T merger, when AT&T got bought out. WT Grant, they worked on the Chrysler restructuring when Chrysler got into a problem with Lee Iacocca. They got involved in the Bass Brothers in Texas. Remember when the Bass Brothers, a very rich family from Texas, tried to corner the silver market?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They represented the banks in that. And my father spent 4 days a week in Texas for a year.
Wow.
Monday through Thursday, he'd be in Texas. On and off. So he wasn't around a lot.
Yeah.
But he built a really great firm, and we ended up reconnecting and became great friends and very close later in life.
Did you initially wish that he had taken more of an interest in your tennis, or did you understand the heaviness of what he was doing?
I don't know what I understood as a kid. I think unconsciously trying to get my father's attention and approval. And I think this is true with a lot of people in a lot of different areas, so I'm not unique. But it was a way for me to get my father's attention and approval. If I did well in tennis, I was not a good student in high school. I became a better student in college and law school, but I was not a good student. My parents were always wondering, because both my parents were straight A students in high school and college, wondering what happened.
I think. Go ahead.
But I think that I did understand, of course, but it was hard not having him around. And my mother I'm one of 4 kids, so my mother wasn't around for tennis either. She was driving me some places, but I couldn't go to a lot of tournaments because I had nowhere to get there.
Oh, I see. Well, how impactful was he in your law career?
Well, he was very encouraging. But I started off in California because I really wanted to cut my own path. So I went to school at the University of California, Davis, up near Sacramento. I took the California bar. I practiced in California for 5 years at small law firms. And he was doing huge cases in New York, and the kind of law I was doing, the kind of law he was doing was not related at all. But he was very encouraging in the whole process.
Didn't you tell me, you told me a story of how he helped you with something that's kind of funny because the lawyers in your firm weren't apprised, I guess, of him, but although they knew him, can you tell that little story when you were
Yeah,
working on a case?
I graduated law school in 1984, and I had one job that didn't work out, and I was looking for a job for 4 or 5 months. And finally, there's a bankruptcy firm in Santa Barbara, California, a small firm that did middle market bankruptcy cases. And they were hiring, and they gave me a job. And my father was a Chapter 11 bankruptcy lawyer, so I should make that clear. He worked on very, very large bankruptcy cases. He represented banks in the Chrysler restructuring. He represented the banks in the Bass Brothers cases. He was very, very well known in banks, representing banks, and I wasn't doing that at all. I was working on small cases. But finally, my boss gave me a project to write a brief trying to take apart someone else's plan of reorganization in bankruptcy. It wasn't a bank or anything, but it was a pretty big case for us, but it was very, very small for my father. So I got on the phone with him and tried to get ideas about how I might approach writing this brief. And he had lots of ideas. He said, "Oh, send me a copy of the draft." So I sent him a copy of the draft, and I got to the office the next morning, and it was the old days of fax machine on rolled paper. And I got to the office, and the fax machine had run out of paper, and it kind of blew up. All the paper was on the floor, and he had taken my draft, and he had handwritten all of his notes on it well into the night and faxed it to me. And a lot of it was stuff that I was never going to come up with because he was already a very, very successful and experienced bankruptcy lawyer at the time. So I put a lot of the stuff in the brief that I wrote for my boss, the partner I was working for. And the partner came into my office and said, "Where'd you get all these ideas?" And I said, "Well, my dad practices bankruptcy in New York, so I asked him for some ideas, and he gave me a couple of ideas." And the partner, who was a pretty experienced bankruptcy lawyer in Los Angeles, before going to Santa Barbara, said, "Oh, you're not telling me that your dad's Leonard Rosen." I said, "Yeah." I was okay. How come you never told us? And that, and that's and we got a big laugh out over it. But the moral of the story was my dad, had certain, aphorisms and things he would teach you. And one is that you have to do things on your own. Don't work on connections. You don't succeed by taking shortcuts. And my view was that if I got a job in Santa Barbara, I should get the job on my own merit, not because my dad was a successful bankruptcy lawyer. So I never mentioned it.
Very, very few people would not mention that.
Well, that's part of my training. My dad kind of, hammered it into me that he had a few of those things.
Interesting.
The other saying he used to say is, character is what you do when no one's watching.
Yeah. So did you become a bankruptcy lawyer as well?
Did I?
Yes.
Yes, I became a bankruptcy lawyer at that moment, and I've been practicing bankruptcy law for 35 years.
35 years. And now you've delved into back into playing competitive tennis at, how old are you now, Adam?
65.
65 years old. How's that going?
It's going good. I mean, I played in the 30 and over. I started playing, but because of kids and work, I was able to play 1 or 2 national a year. And I had some success in the 30s and the 40s. Then I took some time off. Didn't have as much success, but 60 and 65s I've done pretty well. And I've improved my ranking, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm working less, so that's a whole transition, which I think is a whole interesting topic that you can explore with a lot of people, including me. But how people who play junior tennis get into playing senior tennis, if they do. And I'm looking at the Eastern rankings you're talking about, and if John McEnroe, Peter Rennert, Andy Kohlberg, and all these guys, if they all played 65 and over tennis, I don't think my ranking would be too good.
Well,
but a lot of them don't play because they're hurt. They've already done it. It's not much for them to get it's not a big goal for them to win a gold ball. Let's put it that way.
And you really have to dedicate yourself to doing well on a national level, where you're talking about a gold ball or winning a national championship. It's a whole journey.
It's a lot of getting yourself in shape, and it's a lot of luck in terms of being healthy. And we all have friends and who aren't doing well physically, and it's not their fault. So part of it is just staying healthy, and part of it is dedicating yourself to still enjoying it. Some people are off to playing golf, pickleball, and other stuff.
Yeah,
That's fine too.
are there a lot? Most of the players were young players that play the senior tournaments, or
not all of them. No, I mean some guys who are really good in the seniors. I mean, like Bob Litwin is an example, who's a national champion and a world champion, good friends of Floyd Manuels and me. He played in high school. He went to Michigan, didn't make the team, wasn't good enough, I don't think, and became really, really good in the 35s and the 45s. There are examples of that. And then you get the Jay Parkers of the world who played at the U.S. Open, at the U.S. Nationals, and he's still winning gold balls. So I think it's a mixture of people who stayed in shape, who now have the time. But there are some really good players. You have the Mark Vines, you have Tony Dawson. These guys show up and they're all had high ATP rankings.
Tony Dawson still playing some good tennis?
Yeah, he just won a gold ball last week in the indoors.
Dave Severson's been playing quite well too.
Yeah.
Fred Drilling, who's in his 80s, is winning world championships. And so anyway, I think that a lot of people think prescribe to the statistic that's out there that says that people that play tennis average about 9.3 years of longer longevity than the next sport.
I've heard that, and I hope it's true.
I hope it's true too. I hope we all live 9 years longer.
I could say it's great to see guys like Mark Vines, who was a really good pro, won the Paris Open. Roger Dowdeswell was an ATP player. It's great to see these guys show up at a Florida or other senior tennis tournament. They have nothing to prove, everything to lose.
Yeah.
But they put it out there, and they're still playing great. And that to me is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Adam, it's been great visiting with you, and thanks for your time. It's a very interesting story, and we wish you luck on the senior tour. And I guess we wish you luck as a bankruptcy lawyer, because you're still practicing, as I understand, right?
Yeah, I'm still practicing part-time. Great to be with you, Gary. Thanks for the opportunity to talk, and keep up the good work with the show. I'll be listening.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This wraps up another episode of the Gary Plock Tennis Show, and we hope to see you again next time.